The world witnessed the 21st century transform from a promise of peace into an age of mounting uncertainty. The collapse of the Soviet Union was supposed to mark the end of great power conflict, but the years that followed revealed a different story. Old rivalries never truly disappeared. New ambitions took shape in Moscow, Beijing, Washington, and beyond. As the decades unfolded, the pieces of a new global confrontation slid silently into place, and the shadows of a Third World War grew darker. In Eastern Europe, the invasion of Ukraine shocked the world. What many believed impossible became reality, as tanks rolled across borders, cities burned, and millions fled their homes. This was not just a war between two nations. It was a collision of worldviews. Russia declared it a fight for security, for history, for identity. The West saw it as naked aggression, a challenge to the international order built after 1945. Each side dug in, unwilling to yield. The longer the war dragged on, the clearer it became that the conflict was a spark threatening to ignite a far wider blaze. Poland became the front line of NATO's determination. Once divided and conquered in wars past, Poland emerged as a bastion of resistance, a reminder of how fragile borders can be. American troops stationed in its towns, missile defenses installed on its soil, and joint exercises with European allies transformed the nation into a fortress. The Polish people remembered the scars of history, when their land was partitioned and erased from maps. This time, they vowed, would be different. But with determination came danger. The closer Poland stood with NATO, the more it became a target in Moscow's eyes. To the east, another flashpoint simmered. Taiwan stood as the ultimate symbol of defiance against Beijing's ambitions. For China, reunification was not a choice, but a destiny. For the United States and its allies, Taiwan was the front line of democracy in Asia. Each jet that crossed the median line in the Taiwan Strait, each warship that sailed through contested waters became a gamble with fate. Military planners warned that a misstep could draw the entire Pacific into war. Citizens of Taipei went about their lives under the constant hum of tension, never sure if tomorrow would dawn with the roar of missiles. Across the South China Sea, artificial islands bristled with runways, radar, and missile sites. Nations from Vietnam to the Philippines watched anxiously, knowing that control of these waters meant control of global trade. America answered with freedom of navigation operations, sending carriers and destroyers through contested routes. China responded with warnings, sometimes with shadowing ships, sometimes with near collisions. The sea became a chessboard, and every move pushed the players closer to a breaking point. The alliances hardened. NATO expanded, welcoming Finland and Sweden, countries that had for decades avoided entanglement. Their decision was a message. Neutrality was no longer safe. Meanwhile, Russia deepened its ties with nations willing to defy the West. Iran supplied drones, North Korea offered artillery, and above all, China promised a partnership with no limits. The world began to split into camps, each convinced of its righteousness, each preparing for confrontation. The Middle East, long a crucible of conflict, once again felt the pull of great power rivalry. Proxy wars flared in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. Militias armed with foreign weapons fought battles that were never entirely their own. Oil, the lifeblood of modern economies, remained the prize that outsiders sought to control. And whenever tankers were struck or pipelines sabotaged, the price rippled across the globe, reminding every nation that in an interconnected world, no conflict was truly local. In Africa, competition for resources sharpened. Chinese companies built infrastructure in exchange for minerals. Western nations struggled to hold influence. Russia deployed mercenaries, promising protection to fragile governments in return for access to mines. Beneath the surface, the continent became another battleground in the silent war for global dominance. And as droughts and famines spread, fueled by climate change, the potential for instability grew ever greater. Latin America, too, felt the tremors. Economic struggles made governments vulnerable to outside pressure. Protests erupted in streets from Santiago to Caracas, often with chants blaming distant powers for local suffering. The war in Ukraine disrupted grain exports, leaving shortages in countries thousands of miles away. Rising fuel costs inflamed anger at leaders who had little control over global markets. Once again, people learned that in the modern world, the front lines of conflict are not marked only by trenches, but by supermarket shelves. The battlefield itself transformed. Cyber attacks replaced artillery barrages. Silent intrusions into banking systems, power grids, and communication networks became as devastating as bombs. A hospital in one country could lose electricity because of a hacker halfway around the world. Satellites, once symbols of exploration, now became targets, their destruction threatening to plunge nations into digital darkness. The domain of war expanded into space, into cyberspace, into realms where no treaty had ever been tested. Propaganda evolved alongside technology. Deepfakes blurred the line between truth and fiction. Fake videos spread faster than corrections. Populations were not just being informed, they were being manipulated, polarized, and turned against one another. Leaders realized that the war for perception was as important as the war for territory. A single viral clip could change public opinion, shift elections, or justify military action. The battlefield was in the mind as much as on the ground. Economies strained under the weight of conflict. Sanctions intended to punish adversaries reverberated back onto those who imposed them. Energy crises sparked inflation. Food shortages bred unrest. Migrants crossed borders in search of survival, creating political turmoil in nations unprepared for the influx. The fragile global order, built on the assumption of interdependence, began to unravel. Instead of creating peace, interconnectedness became a weapon, where cutting supply chains or blocking trade could cripple societies. History cast a long shadow. Just as the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo had spiraled into World War I, just as appeasement had led to the rise of fascism and World War II, the small sparks of today's conflicts threatened to cascade into catastrophe. Analysts warned that modern leaders, like their predecessors, believed they could control escalation. But wars have a way of slipping beyond the grasp of those who start them. What begins as a limited action can end as total war. Nuclear weapons return to the forefront of discussion. For decades, their existence was treated as deterrence, a grim insurance policy against conflict. Now, leaders spoke of them openly, some hinting at their use if survival was at stake. Submarines prowled beneath oceans, carrying warheads capable of ending civilizations. Missile silos stirred with new activity. The threat that many believed had vanished with the Cold War loomed once again, and with it came the realization that the line between peace and annihilation had grown perilously thin. Military budgets soared. Nations that once prided themselves on peace rearmed. Factories shifted from consumer goods to ammunition. Conscription returned in places where it had long been abandoned. Young men and women prepared to fight wars their parents thought they would never see again. Streets echoed with protests demanding peace, yet governments insisted that strength was the only path to survival. The machinery of war, once in motion, rarely halts without blood. Diplomatic halls became stages for speeches, while real decisions were made on battlefields. Summits produced communiques of peace, while convoys of tanks rolled toward the front. Leaders shook hands in front of cameras, while quietly ordering new deployments. The dance of diplomacy and war blurred into one, leaving populations unsure whether to hope or fear. The 21st century had promised progress, cooperation, and shared prosperity. Yet as the years passed, the same ambitions, the same fears, and the same rivalries that had torn the world apart before resurfaced. History was not repeating itself exactly. It was accelerating, fueled by technology, by interconnectedness, by weapons of unimaginable power. The question that lingered over all was simple, yet terrifying. Would these tensions break into open war? Would the sparks of Ukraine, of Taiwan, of the South China Sea ignite a fire that consumed the world? Would leaders, bound by pride and ideology, drag humanity into a conflict that could end civilizations? The warning signs surrounded us. The storm gathered on every horizon, and the clock ticked, louder with each passing day. The world stands closer to the edge than it has in generations. What began as isolated crises has become a global pattern. Every region feels the strain. Every alliance braces for impact. The powder keg is set. All that remains is the spark. And so, as we look into the uncertain future, we must ask, will we step back from the brink or march forward into the abyss of a third world war? The answer is not yet written, but the signs are clear, the stakes are immense, and the time to understand has never been more urgent. If you found this journey into the shadows of our time compelling, make sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join the community that seeks to explore the past, the present, and the storm that may define our future. Together, we can keep asking the questions that matter, and together, we can ensure the story of our world is not left untold.